Hey everyone, it's Mr. Hefner again, and today we are going to bring to an end our unit on literature of the American Revolution, 1750 to 1800, by taking a look at our final writer, this time a poet. We're going to be looking at Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley is a little different from, okay, she's a lot different from the writers that we've read so far. Up to this point, our writers have been generally well-educated people who read thinkers of the Enlightenment and then wrote about ideas of social contract, self-governance, natural law, that sort of thing. And these ideas led to concepts of independency for the United States. Today, we have a very different author. Phillis Wheatley was not, I shouldn't say she wasn't well educated, but she was not formally educated. You see, it would have been illegal for her to be educated, not because she was a female, but because she was a slave. She had actually been given as a gift to a woman in Massachusetts who then taught her. She turned out to be quite a prodigy and a poet. Now, you may still argue that you can find some concepts of the Enlightenment in this poem, but the reality is this piece is in our unit because we already had Abigail Adams as someone who didn't have a completely formal education, writing about ideas of the Enlightenment and the Revolution. But today we have an American slave, somebody without freedom, still writing. So let's get started. Now, the interesting thing about Phillis Wheatley is she published a book of poems, but her image comes to us from the artist who sketched her picture for her book of poems. Finding art from that artist is quite a challenge, though. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The piece that we're going to read has kind of an odd title. It's called To S.M., a Young African Painter on Seeing His Works. And the history behind this is SM stands for Scipio Moorhead. And Phillis Wheatley at some point saw an exhibit of artwork done by Scipio Moorhead. And she was so moved by it, she thought she should write a poem honoring that artist for his work. And that's what the poem is today that we're going to be reading. She sees his artwork and she writes a poem because she's inspired by that. Our lesson essential question for today is going to be, in what ways are Phillis Wheatley's works both characteristic and uncharacteristic for the time period in which they were written? So you'll notice that lesson essential question, unlike many of the others, doesn't specifically refer to the Enlightenment. We might find Enlightenment theory, kind of ideas in here, but maybe not. I'll let that up to you to decide as we go through. And yet there's something about it that for this time period is characteristic and obviously not characteristic, probably because we have a slave writing poetry in a world where educating a slave was illegal. All right, so this image that I have here, this is colorized. This is actually the colorized image of the sketch that Scipio Moorhead did for Phillis Wheatley. So this could be the front piece in her book of poetry, which she later published. So as I said, she was inspired by his art and she wrote a poem honoring him. And then when she published her book of poetry, he sketched her for the front piece of the book. She was actually born in West Africa and captured. So by the early 1800s, the importation of slaves in the United States will be illegal. But at this time, we're still in that triangle trade. You remember talking about that in your American history class, I'm sure. And she was literally captured, taken from her homeland, trained, and brought to America. And if you notice too, she's brought to Boston by a slave ship. You know, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, where we live, had slavery at one point. In fact, Vermont is the only one of the original 13 colonies that never had slaves. Anyway, she's brought there and she's given as a gift in 1761. So she takes her last name from her mistress, Susanna Wheatley, who educated the child, found that this child was a prodigy, had talents far beyond her years. And look at this. I mean, this is amazing. By age 14, this West African captured and forced into slavery could read and write both in English and in Latin. Now, many of you guys are going to, I shouldn't say many, but some of you guys are going to take Latin for 4 years, and your ability to read and write in Latin will still be severely limited. Not an insult on you, I'm just pointing out what a prodigy she must have been. She got to travel to London. So she had crossed the Atlantic at least 2 times there, and it was to support her book of poetry, which was self-published. So she had to find the money and the investors to be able to self-publish this book and then take it off and try to sell it. And because of her fame and things like that, she was given her freedom in 1774. In the year that the Declaration of Independence was signed, 1776, she got the chance to meet none other than George Washington. Unfortunately, publishing wasn't a way to become wealthy in those days. It's not going to be a way to become wealthy until about the mid-1800s it starts to take off. If you were a writer in the early days of America, you did it because you felt that you had something to say. It was very difficult to do this as a career. And she died in poverty, and we do not know the location of her grave today. It was never marked at the time of her burial. Now, the art note is that sketch. And here you have the original sketch, which was probably done in a pen and ink, charcoal. It's in black and white, not like the colorized version that I showed you before. And this was actually done by Scipio Moorhead, and he is the SM of Wheatley's poem here. So I've already explained this to you. She was inspired by his artwork, and then when she published her book of poems, he repaid the favor by doing her sketch so this image could appear in her books. Like I said, the pictures of Scipio Moorhead, search the internet sometimes. You'll find all kinds of websites about the mystery of Scipio Moorhead. He was the artist who inspired her. His art seems to have vanished. We just don't have it. We cannot show what he did anymore. On the other hand, the one piece that he did to honor her was printed in book after book after book. And so we do have that one. So he was able to save at least one piece of his art for posterity. And as I told you before, you just get to see it on the slide here, I guess. She wrote this to praise Scipio Moorhead's art. Now, he was also, I don't like this at all. This says he was a servant to the Reverend John Moorhead of Boston. In the days of slavery, those who held slaves did not like the word slave, and they used the word servant. So I think that is incorrect. We should know that he also was a slave. They were both slaves. All right, the literary tools that we're going to look for here today are allusion. You possibly remember this from other things, but an allusion is a literary reference to something a reader already knows. So for instance, if there's some great tale of Greek heroism, and today somebody does something very brave, I might say, you know, wow, you're a modern Odysseus or something like that. That makes no sense unless my reader actually understands the story of the Odyssey and who Odysseus was, and then the allusion works. Alluding to things your audience does not know or won't recognize makes for a very weak allusion. And then we have a little bit of poetry terminology here in heroic couplet. So take you back to your Shakespeare studies. You know that in Shakespeare, we sometimes talked about when you have 2 rhyming lines together, we call that a couplet. You have the word couple right here in couplet. So 2 rhyming lines together is called a couplet. Then in Shakespeare's time, the meter, the rhythm of the poetry was something we called iambic pentameter. Okay, iambic pentameter, really, it's complicated. I'm going to try to make it simple here. Penta means 5, all right? So there were 5 of something per meter, okay? Pentameter, pentameter. 5 of what? Well, it was 5 iambs. Well, what's an iamb? An iamb is a metrical foot. A group of syllables in poetry is a metrical foot of 2 syllables, and they're always 1 weak or unstressed syllable followed by 1 stressed syllable. So a word like below, that would fit iambic pentameter if I started a line with, because it's below. It's weak, strong. It's not below, it's below. On the other hand, if I took a similar word and I said under isn't iambic because it's strong, weak. It's not under, it's under, right? So a couplet is 2 rhyming lines, and a heroic couplet is 2 rhyming lines that are in iambic pentameter. And we do this because in a lot of epic poetry, iambic pentameter was used, and the entire epic poem, Stories of Great Adventures, were written in nothing but these series of couplets. So today we call them heroic couplets. Now, here's some examples. In the poem we're going to read, she writes, "Cease, gentle muse, the solemn gloom of night, now seals the fair creation from my sight." All right, so night and sight rhyme. That's 2 lines, so that means it's a couplet. All right, is it a heroic couplet? Well, we have to look at the meter, and we have, "Cease, gentle muse, the solemn gloom of night. Weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong, weak strong. Now seals the fair creation from my sight." And I'm bouncing and I'm stressing this. You wouldn't actually read a poem this way, but you can hear the iambic pentameter. Now, some of you might remember, if you had my class for 9th grade when you did Shakespeare, we used the little line from the TED Talk, "I am a pirate with a wooden leg." And if you can remember that, I am, it starts with I am, right? We're talking iambic pentameter, and it is in iambic pentameter. "I am a pirate with a wooden leg. Now seals the fair creation from my sight." Can you hear that the rhythm's the same? Right? That's what makes this a heroic couplet. This is not easy stuff. If you're rhythmically challenged, I get it. All right, so here's the poem. All right, take the poem. You can pause the video. I'm not going to read the poem to you. You can read the poem right now. And then when you're finished reading the poem, restart the video, and we'll talk about these things right here. So as you read, I want you to look for examples of reason, examples of the age of reason, I guess I should have put there. Look for any heroic couplets, and look for the use of allusion in this poem. All right, so you pause the video, and then start it when you're ready to go on again. Okay, I hope you paused the video because I'm going to go on now. So let's use some check for understanding questions. First of all, that idea of the age of reason. Why are her works historically significant? Number one, Age of Reason said anyone who gets an education can be lifted up. That rising to power and being successful in the world, being one of the people who calls the shots, so to speak, wasn't or doesn't have to be because of your birth, as kings were, born in a line of succession, and just because of your birth, you're special. The Age of Reason was your mind. It's all up here that makes you special. And here we have a child captured from her family in West Africa, brought to the United States, trained to be a slave, taught by her mistress, and becomes an accomplished poet. An accomplished poet who, as you know, understands the classics, probably understands more about the history of ancient Greece and Rome and poetry structures than you do, than I do perhaps. She was a prodigy. All right, second thing, find out an example of allusion in the poem, find an example of heroic couplet is third, iambic pentameter. Let's take a look at all of these. So here's the poem again. Where can we find some good example of allusion in this poem? And they're all throughout, but I'll give you two here. The first one here, she says, "Whose twice 6 gates on radiant hinges ring, celestial Salem blooms in endless spring." And to understand this, you have to understand the religious myth. The word Salem comes from, it's in words like Jerusalem, right? We've heard it there, but it literally means peace. Salem is the same word as the Hebrew shalom, or as in the Arabic salam, all right? And so this is a reference here to heaven. So when she says the 6 gates, sometimes people talk of the 6 gates of heaven and celestial Salem. People who understand that get the allusion. Another one that you might come across comes right after. "Calm and serene, thy moments glide along, and may the muse inspire each future song." Well, the allusion there is in that word muse, which has a footnote, as you can see. The muses in Greek, mythology were minor goddesses, but hey, it's a goddess, right? Goddesses of the arts. And so a lot of times when ancient poets would start in their performances, they would say a prayer to the muse of poetry to bless them, to give them the guidance and the inspiration to go on. So again there, if a reader of this poem doesn't understand what a muse is, then the allusion doesn't work. And there was a muse for each one of the arts. So if you were a painter, you might ask for the support and the guidance of a different muse than if you were a poet. All right, how about heroic couplets? Can we find any heroic couplets in this poem? And the reality is every 2 lines is another heroic couplet. So if we start at the very beginning, to show the laboring bosom's deep intent and thought in living characters to paint. And I know you might say, no, Wade, intent and to paint, they don't work. Sometimes you force rhyme just a little bit, but that's a heroic couplet. It's an iambic pentameter. Each line is an iambic pentameter, and then the ends of them rhyme, which make it a couplet. Here's another. High to the blissful wonders of the skies, elate thy soul and raise thy wishful eyes. Of the skies, wishful eyes. Yep, we got a rhyme there, both lines. It's a couplet. And then do we have the iambic pentameter? High to the blissful wonders of the skies. Elate thy soul and raise thy wishful eyes. Yep, absolutely. It's iambic pentameter. So that those are both heroic couplets, but every other pair of lines in this entire poem are also heroic couplets. Here's another one. Still with the sweets of contemplation blessed, may peace with balmy wings your soul invest. Well, no, wait, that looks like 4 lines, right? I know, it's just the topography of the textbook, which has that, made that confusing. You can hear the lines. Again, here's the first line, still with the sweetness of contemplation blessed, right? Contemplation blessed, wings your soul invest. They rhyme, and they're in iambic pentameter. May with the balmy wings your soul invest. Right? So those are all, everything's heroic couplets in there. All right, and then of course, here's a good example of the iambic pentameter. So let me, just for a second, I'm gonna put my highlighter away and I'm just gonna grab the pen. I've got a pen now. And so what we can do with iambic pentameter, and here's a heroic couplet, is let's break it down every 2 syllables. So let me see, I lost my pen. There it is. I need a bigger, fatter pen than this one. Still may the painters and the poets fire. All right. So I broke up every 2 syllables, and it's still, weak, strong. Still may the painters and the poets fire. This is hard to do with a mouse, but trying my best here. So again, this, lost it again. Let me go back here and get my highlighter for a second. They need to give me a bigger pen if they're going to give me a pen. It's hard to see this pen. Let's see here. Let's go to the highlighter. So again, this is an iamb. This is an iamb. This is an iamb. This is an iamb. And this is an iamb. And you notice that an iamb doesn't have to be the full word. If an iamb had to be the full word, that means you could do nothing but use 2-syllable words. And English is full of multisyllabic words. So let's do this with a highlighter. Again, to aid, 2 syllables. Thy pen, soul and, thy verse. And here we have a 2-syllable word making itself the iamb. But again, look at this. To aid, weak, strong. Thy pen, soul and, thy verse, conspire. And so that is iambic pentameter as well. So both of these together make a heroic couplet. Be sure to look in Schoology, see if there are any other assignments that go with this lesson today. And if you're working asynchronously, watch your time. You still need to finish things on the days that they are assigned. You cannot save them all for the weekend, all right? All right, I'll see you next time, guys.